Tony Roberts is my name, and I'm an author of a number of series, mainly the Casca series, which is about an immortal soldier who fights through the ages. He's the Roman soldier who pierced Jesus' side of the cross, and he was cursed to fight forever until the second coming. So he's so far lasted 2,000 years, fighting in all sorts of wars. This is about the Wars of the Roses, but there are so many wars covered in history from 2,000 years. And there's, at the moment, about 55 books in the series, and there's 2 written every year. And you can find that on casca.net. There's all about the series, all about the characters, timeline, and a shop where you can buy these books in paperback. And this book and this book are 2 of my other series. This one's called the Siren series. This is the 3rd book in it, about a rock band that goes from 1979 to 2014. Covers all the trials and tribulations of the rock band, as you may well expect, ups and downs. It's life. It covers UK history between 79 and 2014 as well in the background. The main character has to overcome various trials and tribulations to get where she wants to go. This is a horror police investigation book, Thirsty Wings, set in 2016 in London, where something is killing off various people of the London underworld. And the policeman, that guy there, is hot on her tail and is told to back off when he gets too close because government are covering up something. So there you go. There's that one. That's also available on my shop. You can also look at it at tonyrobertsauthor.com, which is linked to casca.net. And you can also go onto the shop there. And this is a high fantasy series called Castania. This is book number 8. And these are 2 of the characters, the second generation of people, this family that takes control in this fantasy empire, which is on the point of collapse. And the empire is saved by this family, but they've got to battle foreign invaders, rival houses within the empire, and there's magic in it. There's demons, there's witches, and there's all sorts of things going on. And you can read all about that in these books. And I also have another series called Dark Blade, which is available only on ebooks. You can get these paperbacks plus the ebooks on Amazon Kindle or Kobo. And you look at my name, Tony Roberts, and then the series concern, Dark Blade or Castania or Casca or Thirsty Wings. So that's where you can get those. Now, John here, as you can see, he's also an author like myself, and Truck Stop is one of his books, as you can see in the background there. And this particular site, which he runs very well, looks after indie authors, and it's to be followed because he does a fantastic job in promoting people, and does a worthwhile job that certain big corporations don't.
But yeah, I had to get my coffee. Sorry.
Well, I've just finished my cup of tea, so I'm fine and dandy.
Oh yeah, what shirt is that one?
It's one of the Caribbean islands, Antigua or Anguilla. I'm not sure which. It's a bit faded, but it's either Antigua or Anguilla, one of the islands in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I like those little shoulder things.
Oh yeah, Admiral. That's the makers.
Admiral. Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's one of the shirt manufacturers. You got Adidas, you got Umbro, and this is Admiral.
So how's everything's going?
Okay, actually, we've had some sunshine again.
Must be nice. I think you sent over too much rain.
Yeah. Well, we're due some tonight. Actually, we're due some a lot tonight, and then tomorrow again it's sunny, so that's fine.
Yeah, it's been raining like crazy over here. So
good. You need it.
Yeah, we kind of need it here. It's just that sometimes I'm like, no, not today. I just don't want to go away.
You would hate it here then.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd hate it, but it's too much of a good thing. is a bad thing, you know?
But what we're seen to be suffering from now is long periods of identical weather. So when it's dry, it's dry for a long time, and when it's wet for a long time. You know?
Right.
Not like it used to be. It used to be broken up. You know, you had 2 or 3 days of this, then it's okay. Now you're talking about 2-3 weeks of it. You think, good God. Yeah. But anyway, that's climate change for you.
Yeah, climate change. That's a totally different topic. But where did we leave off anyway?
Book 51.
Book
Saracen.
51. Oh yeah, the Saracen. That was one that you wrote. That you wrote that back in early 2000s.
2005. Yeah, I actually started it in the summer, and I got halfway through when I discovered the film Kingdom of Heaven, which coincided with the same sort of location and period of this book. And I was still writing it when I actually got the job of Casca writer, so I had to quickly finish it. I also hurriedly arranged, or got arranged for me, thanks to Jane paying for it, a kind of a writer's course in Bristol, a one-day thing. And I took sort of drafted this along and showed the fellow who was doing the course, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's not bad." He said, "I could give you a few tips on certain the prologue or the first chapter," which he did. So I've incorporated some of that into there. So he's uncredited because I can't remember his name, but but this one sat for quite a few years on the back burner, and it's only finally published in 2019. Mainly due to the fact that Gale had specifically said he didn't want it published because it had Casca fighting for a Muslim army, in this case Saladin's, in 1187.
Which is kind of strange because you had Barry Sadler. He wrote The Assassin, so
well, yeah,
it actually fit what was going on.
Yeah. So I don't know why, but Gale. Yeah. Anyway, this book I felt had to be written because it was squashed in between the Barry Sadler era books, the Samurai, which ended in 1185 with that Battle of Danaura, and beginning of the Mongol, which was 1189, there or thereabouts. So you had this sort of 4-year gap, and one of the Barry Sadler era books had mentioned that he'd been in Jerusalem when Saladin had captured it. That was 1187. So you had this sort of like date in the middle of that 4-year period. So I thought, well, that's got to be written. So I put him in the army of Saladin at the Battle of Hattin, which is the big one, which decided the future of Jerusalem. And in history, that is one of the rare battles of history which both sides, when they wrote about it, agreed on everything. So there's no doubt as to how the battle went, what happened, who did what, and when and how. Both sides, the Crusaders and Saracens, agreed that is what happened. So yeah, I put Casca in the army. It begins with him at sea, because at the end of the Saracen, Samurai, he'd been cast into the ocean, hadn't he? So I picked it up from there. He got to India. He had a bit of a chat with somebody, and then they were talking about the Crusader lands, which he obviously left in the events of the Crusader. So he returned to see what was going on, and he fell foul of the Templars in a bad way, and they thought he was a spy or something, and they threw him off the fortress, and of course he died and then came back to life, and there was this woman involved, and he had to try and rescue her, being the gallant knight he was and everything. So I sort of wound it round real characters of that period, and it ends up with him falling foul of the Saracens because he rescued a Crusader family from a corrupt Muslim. So they turned on him, and he was then sent north to be captured in a raid in Turkish territory, and he would then be sold as a slave to the character of Zutai, where the Mongol begins, because he's chained up as the beast in the pit, isn't he? So I had to get him to that position. So that's how I wrote that in. So it was a kind of a sort of neat tidying up at the very end of this story, so to fit in with what happened in the Mongol. So that was the Saracen.
The Saracen. And that was one of your last ones that you wrote before you became a Casca writer?
It was the last one.
Yeah.
It was the last one I wrote. Yeah.
And then what's the next one after this one?
The next one after that, I have to actually give you credit for, because you were.
Yeah.
It's not your fault.
Yeah, but it is. But it was. Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, you suggested the title. There was again this period where he was just before the events of the Cursed, wasn't it? The one where he was in the Boxer Rebellion. It said he'd come from the Americas in 1899, and the American war against Spain over Cuba was 1898. And I thought, well, that just fits in. I thought I could have him in that war, and then tack it up, as a kind of immediate prequel to the Curse. So again, I was trying to tack these stories onto existing books in the series.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rough Riders, what you said, it's about the war in Cuba and the Battle of San Juan, wasn't it? The hill.
Yep.
Mm. And again, I'd heard about it. I didn't know much about it, so I had to sort of research it. And the name of Theodore Roosevelt kept popping up, and I thought, okay, so I again used that to include him in the story and put Casca around him in the events of this particular story.
Right. Not to mention, it starts out in Mexico, and that's where I'm at. So I kind of like that. I had to put that plug in there, for New Mexico, and then how the Rough Riders, how a lot of them came from here, from New Mexico.
Yeah, they did. And I was sort of looking at the war. I had a book that I bought on that particular war specifically. It was a very military-oriented one of the Osprey military books, and it listed all the units and areas where they came from. So it was all over the place. I just picked one at random. But as you say, there was New Mexico, and I remember you shot me a few pictures and photographs of the area, something like that. Which I used to sort of describe.
Santa Fe in the old days.
That's right. There are a couple of comments on Amazon where people had sort of a kind of their own centric view of it, and because I'd not written that particular area, that they criticized it a little bit, but I think that's down to a little bit of ignorance, not knowing the full range of where these units came from.
Right.
Because the US Army called on a whole load of people to get to Florida, where they were sort of like shipped from across to Cuba. And in fact, a lot of the soldiers didn't even get there because it was a sort of like a bit of a logistical mess. They didn't have enough ships.
Right.
And I had to sort of put Casca then in an army, a unit which actually got there. So that narrowed it down a little bit. But yeah, there was it was a straightforward campaign, really, going up the hill and getting shot at and surviving as he would. Once they captured the city beyond the hill, the war was more or less over. The Spaniards realised that the jig was up, and that was it. But it was an interesting little aside, and I put in a kind of a B plot where there was a unpleasant Spanish chap, which Casca had to sort of take it out on, and we took it aside from the A plot. But yeah, it was an interesting little story there, because I learned myself a little bit about that war.
It's called it was, from what I've read, it was called a politician's war, corporate war. It was like one of the first ones.
Yeah, I mean, wars nowadays are corporate wars. I mean, you just got to look at Iraq, as a corporate war in itself, all for big business to get more profit. And the pretext in which they went to war on was totally false, as we all know, or those of us want to, speak the truth.
Right.
And this was, as you say, the first. He was a politician. He spoke to the newspapers there and then, making out that he was, the main man. He was very clever, and he certainly did the right thing in get him fame, and of course he became president, didn't he? After that, so it certainly worked, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And then so this one at the end,
I sort of had to sort of finish it very quickly, and he drops into the States, and he sort of has to work to San Francisco. So he gets off with somebody he just bumps into on the way, and goes off with her. And from San Francisco, he would then go to Hong Kong, you see, to start the Cursed. So I had to get him to a port on the West Coast. So, I sort of like contrived so that he was going to go west, meets this woman, and chats up with her, and they go off to San Francisco. And that's where he would get the ship to Hong Kong and join the British Army. So then it leads on to the Curse quite conveniently, really.
Right.
But when you're writing in a series and you've got books that have already been written, and at a certain point in history, you've got to join them up in a logical and understandable way. And that's the only way I could do it, is to get into San Francisco from Cuba, and it's a hell of a journey. So that was the only reason why he would go there, just to go on a train and check up with a woman.
Right. So after the Rough Rider?
After the Rough Rider, I was sort of like trying to finish those stories that I'd written in the 90s. So one of them was this one, The Last Defender.
Right.
It was one that I wanted to put in for a long time. It was the heroic last stand of the Byzantine Empire. It's one of those stories that captures the imagination. You talk about famous last stands like Leonidas and the Spartans at Thermopylae and the Alamo and Rorke's Drift and that sort of thing. This was one of those that took place in the year 1453, when, for all intents and purposes, it was the Roman Empire's last stand. And Casca, being a Roman soldier, when he'd grown up, he couldn't miss it. He had to be there as the last defender. So he was he felt as though he had to be there. And I think what happened, there was about 8,500 defenders, and there were about 120,000 attackers. And they held out for 6 weeks, against all the odds. And they had those great walls of Constantinople, which had stood for 1,000 years. And it was the new technology, gunpowder, which brought them down. The Turks had these dirty great cannons and were blasting great chunks out of them. But even so, it still took them 6 weeks to get through. And there's a lot of books written on the subject. And I've got a couple of them over there in my bookshelf. And for Casca, it was a traumatic experience, as you can imagine, if you're somebody who's grown up as a certain person, like a Roman soldier, and even though you've become immortal, you've lived for all these years, your heart is still with your homeland, and this was the last of his homeland. When it fell, he was very traumatized by it. And the Paul Dengaleghi book, the beginning of the Defiant, mentions him being in, is it Defiant? Yeah, it is Defiant. Yeah. Mentions him being with Paul Gutenberg, or Johannes Gutenberg, isn't it? Right. The printer. And I think he had Goldman traveling to in Germany, finding the museum and finding Gutenberg's story about, I met a madman today, and describes Casca. So I had it, this was the prequel to that, where he gets to Genoa when the ship sort of departs Constantinople, and Casca then would leave the ship and make its way to Gutenberg's side. So this was how he got there, basically, traumatized and not very happy, and very down, actually. So yeah, it had to be written, and so that was that story.
That's definitely one that one's like in the top 5 of my favorites. Mm-hmm. It's well written and well documented and everything. So
I mean, being
it definitely had a different voice to it.
I love the Byzantine history, and I've got a lot of books on the subject. It's a particular favorite of mine, and the fall of it is very sad and very emotive. In fact, there is a huge school of thought that says that the fall of Constantinople to the Turks actually directly led to the discovery of the New World, because the trade routes to the east, the spices and the silks, were cut when the Turks captured Constantinople. So the merchants had to look elsewhere, and they looked west. They thought, well, perhaps they could find it going west. And the flat Earth theory actually didn't exist. That was all a myth. That was rubbish. It was actually invented by a Victorian American novelist in the 19th century. The theory about the flat Earth. So forget it. They didn't believe in the flat Earth at that time.
Right.
They were more advanced than that, than some close-minded people nowadays. And they knew that if they went west far enough, they could possibly find new land. They had no idea America existed, because they'd lost knowledge of what Leif Erikson and the Vikings had done in Newfoundland in the 1430s. So they sent Columbus off from Spain, and actually also somebody called Cabot from Bristol here in England. He went. He's not so well known, but he discovered or rediscovered Newfoundland, which is why it's called Newfoundland. In 1497, 5 years after Columbus, 5 years after Columbus bumped into the West Indies. So
sounds like a Casca story right there, doesn't it?
Well, unfortunately the period's covered, so you can't. But in Bristol we got a statue of John Cabot, or Giovanni Caboto as his real name is, because he's from, I can't remember which. Columbus was Italian and so was Cabot, and I can't remember, one's from Genoa and one's from Florence. I can't remember which is which. But we got a statue down in the centre of Bristol, in the Docklands there, where he set out on his ship, the Matthew, because the Matthew was his son, and he called his ship the Matthew. And there's a replica of the Matthew which floats around in Bristol Harbour. They actually went in that. It's bloody small. They risked going across the Atlantic Ocean in that. Bloody hell. But it's a story again which is well known in Bristol. And was America named after Americana Vespucci, or was it named after the customs official of Bristol Harbour, who was Fred Emerick at that time? Who knows?
Little bits of history that keep cropping up and popping to the surface, and
you don't know.
Emerick
was the Bristol controller of customs when Cabot went to Newfoundland, came back and said, "Look what I found." So that was a little bit of an aside there.
Right, but it's still an interesting piece of information. So after the Last Defender, I again looked at a story that could possibly come from Barry Sadler's stories, and this one was one I thought, right, I'm going to do a more modern one, and this was 1954 to 1962, the Algerian War, because the Legionnaire ended with the defeat at the Am Phu, didn't it? And Casca and Gus leaving Vietnam, and they were going back to Algeria, because that's where the French Foreign Legion was based. And the Desert Mercenary was based about 1962, and had spoken about them leaving the French Foreign Legion after the Algerian War, where he was called Al-Qatel, if you remember. That was Sharif Mahmoud, wasn't it, who called him Al-Qatel? And that is the killer in Arabic. So hence the title of that book, The Killer. And he actually meets up with Sharif Mahmoud in this novel. And I thought, well, I'm going to write down everything that appeared in Desert Mercenary in connection with this, and then try and include it in this story. And I did a lot of research on the Algerian War, and it was a really nasty, horrible war where both sides were as bad as each other. Right.
You'll get supporters of one side praising them and butchering the other, and then in the other side doing exactly the same. There were no good guys in this war, none at all. All right, nobody covered themselves in glory. There was torture on both sides. There was slaughter on both sides. They were killing each other wholesale. The French won the war, but lost the peace. which is why Algeria became independent.
Right. Yeah. And then
so I had Casca fighting for the French Foreign Legion, doing his bit and getting his name, the killer Alcatel. So there, it's quite a well-received book, this one, actually. A lot of people like it.
Yeah, a lot of people like that one, and it's also one of your top 5 sellers, isn't it? It's up in the top 5, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and hope for more.
Yeah, it is a good story, and I think people are kind of into the more modern stories. Is that true?
A lot of them, yeah, because a lot of the readers who buy the books are actually either currently serving or formerly serving military people, so they can relate to more modern wars. Although they do like the medieval ones, because it's a more romantic sort of. Sorry, I'm being distracted. I'm getting pop-ups, messages that I'm having sales coming up.
Yeah.
One to Germany. All right, I'll deal with that later.
Right.
Yeah, they do like the more romantic times of medieval periods. They do like the modern ones a bit more because they can relate to it because it's what they know. But even so, there are a lot of people who like the sword era stories too, and that's the ones I prefer to write. But people want the more modern ones, so I am beginning to cater to that sort of taste now, and I'm getting a bit more used to writing more modern stuff.
And then after the Killer
was the ones that I'd written before becoming the official writer, and that's the Moor. Again, sort of on the side of the Muslims, but also on the side of the Christians. He was sort of like bouncing one to the other in this one. The Moor covers quite a long period, actually. It covers sort of around about beginning of the 8th century to the year 732, which is the Battle of Tours. So it generally covers about a 30-year period, and it begins with him being uncovered under a sand dune in the Sahara Desert, where he'd been entombed for 50 years. There's no book at the moment covering that period, but it's generally associated with the rise of Islam from Arabia. After the events of the Sultan's Brotherhood, he actually meets Muhammad, and that's written in one of the Barry Sadler era books. It actually states that, so you can't argue with that because the Barry Sadler book says it. It's so, but there's nothing been written on that yet. And then there's the wars of the first few caliphs who rode out from the desert of Arabia to overrun a lot of the Middle East. That's possibly a book for the future. This one picks up from there after he falls foul of one of the imams that I described. I mean, he's under the sand dune until a storm frees him, and he sort of comes back to life. He scares the bejesus out of this merchant who's traveling and is taking shelter, and he finds Casca's body and thinks, I'll rob him. And he comes back to life and he thinks he's a zombie, or a jinn or something like that, and he runs away. And Casca's sort of stumbling through the desert, water. Then it picks up properly then with him at a place called Tangier, which is now in Morocco nowadays, the far end of the Sahara, opposite Spain. And the Muslims have reached Tangier and are besieging it. And there's a legend that pertains to the fall of the Visigoth kingdom of Spain at this time, when the king, Roderick, sort of has as his guest the daughter of Count Julian of Tangier, who's holding out for the Christians. And in the words of the book that I read, puts her to shame. So you can understand what he did to her, the young lady in question.
Right.
She wasn't a maiden afterwards. And Count Julian reads a letter from her, it's sort of pleading for him to take her away from this monster of a king. And Julian throws a hissy fit, and says, right, I want somebody to get revenge. Cue Casca. Hello, I'll do it, kind of thing, So Julian sort of turns Tangier over to the Moors, says, look, I'm not fighting for Roderick anymore. He's violated my daughter. I'm really in the piss with him. And Casca joins the forces of the Moors. They go over to Spain, and it's a big battle at the Guadalete, which basically gives Spain to the Muslims. They still can't quite pin where the battle was. It's one of those mysterious places in history where there's a big battle somewhere, but can't quite put their finger on it.
Where that battlefield is at.
Yeah. But the Guadalete is actually a Spanish river, which actually is a Latinized version of an Arabic word. Wadi. Wadi is Arabic for river or gully. So if you look at a map of Spain, a lot of the Spanish rivers are Guada something or other. That's directly from the Arabic Wadi. So there, that's another sort of.
Did you have fun writing this one? Because I noticed that it seemed
I did.
Like this one interested you, so you were really kind of into it.
Again, it's a period of history that I was interested in. I wrote it in the 90s when I had absolutely no sort of deadline. It took me about 6 years to write this one. I came back to it and went away, came back to it. And it follows Casca's journey through Spain, and then he falls foul eventually of the Brotherhood of the Lamb, who are sort of infiltrating the Muslim faith, and one of the Muslim rulers is now a Brotherhood person, and Casca falls foul of him and goes to the Pyrenees to settle down, and his life is interrupted there by a raiding party. He takes it out on the raiding party, gets wounded, falls into a lake, drowns, is there for 20 years. There's a drought, the lake level drops, he comes around, walks off completely stark naked, as he does, and finds some clothes, makes his way to France, or Francia as it's called then, joins the Franks under Charles Martel to stop the Muslim army conquering France in the Battle of Tours, which is one of the big battles of history.
Yeah.
And I ended there with him on the victorious side of the Franks, and then leading up to a possible book, him being in Charlemagne's army, because that period follows directly from that, which I sort of led it up to, because he's got to be in Charlemagne's army, because Charlemagne was one of the great warlords of history, and there was all sorts of conflicts there, and somebody like Casca wouldn't stay away from that, being the sort of person he was. So that's the Moor. So that filled in quite a gap in the timeline for Casca.
Right. And then after this one?
After that one, I again switched to the gun period, and this one was Waterloo, the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Follows on from my book, Napoleon Soldier, because at the end he's shot, and he comes around in the coffin, gets out, goes off to Holland, where he's on a farmland, and then Napoleon returns. So he thinks, right, I'm not going to be on Napoleon's side. I'm fed up with the man. I'm going to try and stop him. So he joins the British Army under Wellington and takes part in the two battles of Quatre Bras and Waterloo. So I pick a unit he's in. I look at both battles. I've got books on that over there, and I think it's a 28 foot he's in. I think it's the South Gloucester or the North Gloucestershires. I can't remember which it is. South Gloucestershires, and he's in that one. And they are part of the final push that finally defeats Napoleon's army, along with the Prussians coming in. So yeah, that was quite an enjoyable one to write as well. And of course, over here we've got the Sean Bean series Sharp, which is all about the Napoleonic period, So I had that in mind, but I'd largely forgotten the events of the Waterloo one, which I didn't think was one of the best in the Sharp series anyway. But I sort of had him fighting Quatre Bras and Waterloo, and that ticked a lot of boxes as far as the history was concerned.
Yeah, that was actually a good one. And then the next one,
the current one, which is just out now and is selling like mad, which is all these people buying it, is the Red Rose. And the intention originally was to be a prequel to the Conquistador, because the Conquistador picks up in 1485, and the Wars of the Roses begins in 1455 and ends in 1485. So I thought, yeah, that will yeah, that would be a great start. But again, when I was sort of like going into it, there were so many battles. I had to do it in two. So this is the first part of it. I will do the second part at another time. And this picks up really from the end of the Last Defender. And he's making his way through Flanders. He's still in a little bit of a depressed state of mind. And he rescues this woman who's being attacked by French bandits who are going to put her to shame, shall we say. So he intervenes just in time, being the gentleman he is, but he's not particularly, enamored with her to start off with. And she and he have a little bit of a snipe at each other, and they're having a war of words. But he eventually agrees to help her get to England through Calais, which is English owned at the time. And then he joins up with the Duke of Somerset, who's a kinsman of this woman, and he fights for the Lancastrian cause in that war, even though they looked like they weren't exactly on the side of right. I think the Duke of York was, but that's the way it goes. And there are some battles that they win, and there's some battles that they lose. And I thought that the best way of ending it would be at the Battle of Towton, which in England is the bloodiest battle on English soil. In one day, I think 28,000 were killed.
Wow.
It's dirty great. It was a huge battle and slaughter, basically. Most of them who died running away, because once one side breaks per shoot, that's when most of the deaths occurred, because they were just pushing each other, like they did in that period of time. One side broke, that was it. It was like every man for themselves, and there was this huge dip and a river they had to get across, and of course people were trapped and they were just cut down. So Casca was cut down. He comes to, he gets across, he makes his way to the castle of the woman that he met at the beginning of the book, where he can pick up his relationship with her, shall we say, in the next book.
Right.
So that's about 1461 in our time period.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that ends. So again, it's selling well. I've got hopes that it will sell quite well. And as to what I am writing now, you were talking about modern wars. I am writing The Hunter, which takes place during the current war of our time, 2022. It's the Russia-Ukrainian war, where Casca gets involved in this war, and the Brotherhood of the Lamb got this underground facility, which was sort of abandoned hastily when Chernobyl went up in 1986. And now that the Russians have come back, the Brotherhood think, now we can go back and open it up and get the stuff out. And Casca finds out, and he's sent by the Longini, his guardian angels, to get there first and terminate with prejudice everybody he comes across, shall we say.
That's the good old way right there.
Yeah. So he's there dressed up to the nines with Russian body armor, helmets. He's got an AK-12. He's got a Russian pistol, one of the 18-shot pistols. And I thought, might as well have loads of bullets, to kill plenty of people. And what I've just done is split the story. So it's not just one person. It's Casca going off to try and infiltrate this base, but Haley Landry's, who's appeared in a few of the other books, she's flying the helicopter, but now she's being pursued by the Russians separately. And so there'll be her story, and there'll be Casca's story. So there'll be two stories in parallel going through this. In fact, just before you came on, I was writing a bit where Haley was sort of like being ordered to land by the Russians, or else be shot down. So I'm just sort of like going through that bit.
Right. So, how far ahead do you think you've got the Casca series planned? What's the future? Because I know there's a lot of guys that kind of want to know, well, how much further can it go? And people don't realize that the series can go on for a long time.
As long as history continues. So today will be history tomorrow. So you can write up to, well, I can write up to yesterday. So, things are going on. People have asked me about writing in the future. No, it's not a future. It's not a future series. You've got plenty of those, so go and read those. Casca's a history series. There are plenty of gaps in the timeline that still need to be written about. and it depends on how many years you put into one book. But I think the idea is now to put less and less years in, because it gives you more stories. So after I'm gone, I don't want to go anytime soon, but I'm 62 this year, so I don't know how much longer I have. Well, yeah, you say that, but so many bloody things happen, what with COVID and everything. You just don't know.
Right.
But I intend going for as long as I can. I'm not going to retire until I'm actually not physically or emotionally or mentally capable of doing it. So yeah, I intend to write as many books as possible, 2 a year, and I'll keep going. So the next one after this will be a Sword Era story. I've yet to determine which that is. But the one after that, the Gun Era, will be with Frederick the Great in the 7 Years' War in the Prussian army. So that will be that one. But I've yet to think up one to do for this next Sword Era story.
And there's times that you get emails from fans, recommending certain stories, and then you're kind of like, that's
all the
probably
time.
not a bad idea.
Yeah, all the time. And I sort of like see if it's feasible and possible, and that's what I do. I sort of got them in the back of my mind, and if they do actually work with the timeline, and he hasn't been there before, then yeah, I certainly consider it. Somebody asked me about the Swedish army of Gustavus Adolphus the other day. So again, that's another possible. That's a 30 Years' War. That's another possibility. So, and then there's William Wallace of Scotland. The Braveheart. I've certainly got that in mind. He will have a story with that. So maybe I'll do that next in a Sword Era story. Fighting for the Scots against England. Braveheart.
Is this kind of a luck of the draw kind of thing?
Yeah.
Whatever interests you at the moment.
Yeah. Whatever floats my boat. So there you go.